Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Wuda Tuff Flora. Around 298 million years ago, a tropical swamp forest grew near the equator of a very different Earth. Today, that place is the Wuda coalfield in Inner Mongolia, China. One day, a volcano to the north sent a curtain of ash drifting down over the forest. The ash kept falling for days, until it had buried everything under a layer about 66 centimeters thick. The trees did not topple and float away. They were sealed where they stood. That single ashfall did something extraordinary. It did not just kill the forest. It photographed it. When the paleobotanist Hermann Pfefferkorn of the University of Pennsylvania began studying the site with Jun Wang of the Nanjing Institute of Geology and Paleontology, they realized they were looking at a frozen instant. Their landmark paper appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2012. They called it a snapshot at time zero, a forest preserved exactly as it lived rather than as scattered debris. The team mapped about 1,000 square meters, plant by plant, recording every specimen in its original growing position. They found 6 distinct vegetation groups. Tree ferns of the group Maratiales dominated much of the swamp. Towering over them were lycopsides of the genus Sigillaria, some estimated at up to 25 meters tall. There were also chordates, early relatives of conifers. The canopy was layered, like a modern rainforest. The ash captured detail that almost never survives. Leaves, branches, cones, and spore organs were preserved still attached to their parent plants. That let researchers reconstruct whole plants instead of guessing from broken pieces. They even found the mysterious Noegarathiales standing in growth position, which helped clarify how those plants lived before they went extinct. The arrangement of the forest was not uniform. In the wetter interior of the mire, ferns dominated the floor. On slightly better drained patches, the towering Sigillaria and the chordates took hold. That patchiness is exactly what you would expect in a living swamp, and it is the kind of fine-grained ecological information that ordinary fossils almost never preserve. To make sense of it, the team reconstructed the forest in 3 dimensions, and the artist Renyu Gao painted the canopy as it would have looked from the inside. The site matters far beyond botany. These early Permian swamps are the ancestors of the coal we still burn today, so understanding how their carbon was locked away feeds directly into models of the planet's ancient climate. The Wuda forest is, in a real sense, a frozen page from the story of Earth's carbon cycle. How do we know the layer was volcanic? The tuff contains glass shards and tiny zircon crystals, the chemical fingerprints of an eruption, and those zircons can be dated. This is where the science meets debate. The mainstream reading is simple. A single short ashfall buried the plot all at once. A second, more cautious view from sedimentologists suggests slight reworking, meaning a few patches might blend moments that were close, but not identical. A third question is about scale. How well does 1,000 square meters represent a whole region rather than just one local mire? Researchers are still mapping new plots as the coal mine exposes fresh tuff, racing the machines that destroy the outcrop even as they reveal it. If ash can freeze a forest, it turns out it can also freeze a single afternoon of footsteps. Number 2. The Ipolytarnóc Footprints. In northern Hungary, near the border with Slovakia, there's a place where you can still see who walked past about 17 million years ago. The site is Ipolytarnóc, now protected inside a nature conservation area within the Novohrad Nograd UNESCO Global Geopark. In the early Miocene, this was a sandy shoreline. Then, a massive eruption of rhyolite, a silica-rich volcanic ash, fell from a volcano to the north and sealed the beach in a single event. What the ash sealed was movement. More than 3,000 individual footprints have been cataloged here, making it one of the richest Miocene track sites in all of Europe. The animals that left them include birds, bear dogs of the group called amphichonids, rhinoceroses, deer-like artiodactyls, and early relatives of elephants. The prints are so finely preserved that toe pads, claw marks, and even skin texture can be read in some of them. There is also a tree. Above the footprint layer lies a petrified pine, a trunk turned to stone by silica seeping through the volcanic deposits. Beneath the footprints, marine sandstone holds shark teeth, recording a sea that lapped nearby. So the layers read like a three-act story: sea at the bottom, shore in the middle, catastrophe on top. Scientists treat the trackways as recorded behavior. From the spacing and direction of prints, they reconstruct which way animals were heading, how fast they moved, and whether they traveled in herds or alone. Several footprint species, named as ichnotaxa, such as Bestiapeda, have their type specimens here. That is the formal way of naming a track when no skeleton is attached to it. The technique matters because a footprint records something a bone never can. A skeleton tells you what an animal was. A footprint tells you what it was doing. Here you can follow a single creature's path across the ancient sand and watch it pause, turn, or quicken its pace, 17 million years after the fact. The regional ash layer that sealed the beach, known as the lower rhyolite tuff, spreads across much of the Carpathian region. That makes it more than a local curiosity. Geologists use it as a time marker to line up rock layers across hundreds of kilometers, so the Hungarian shoreline becomes an anchor point for dating events all over Central Europe. The site has been treasured for a long time. Its famous petrified tree was protected after discoveries in the 1860s. Today, a building shelters the main track-bearing slab, and conservators fight a constant battle against humidity and erosion. Here, the theories diverge in interesting ways. The mainstream view is that one rhyolitic ashfall sealed a single day of animal traffic, a true Pompeii of the prehistoric coast. A second debate surrounds the track makers themselves, because footprints rarely match cleanly onto known skeletal species, so identities stay uncertain. A third strand is closer to folklore. Old accounts describe a giant pine some 95 meters tall, while realistic estimates of the preserved trunk are far smaller. Footprints, though, are only surfaces. Ash can do something stranger still. It can bury an entire forest upright, with the animals still inside it. Number 3. The Chemnitz Petrified Forest. In the German city of Chemnitz, in Saxony, people have been pulling fossils out of the ground for centuries. What lies beneath the streets is an early Permian forest, about 291 million years old. It was buried by pyroclastic flows and ashfall from a nearby volcanic event recorded in a layer called the Zeisigwald Tuff. The trees were preserved standing up, rooted in the same soil they grew in. This site is special for a reason that goes beyond the trees. It preserved plants and animals together, a rare achievement for volcanic burial. Between 2008 and 2011, a planned scientific excavation led by Ronny Rössler of the Museum für Naturkunde Chemnitz dug into the Hilbersdorf district and recovered a complete fossil ecosystem. The plants tell of a lush world. There were tree ferns of the genus Soronius, seed ferns called Medulosa, horsetail relatives known as calamitalians, chordates, and the woody plant Arthropodes. Among them lived a surprising cast of animals. Early reptiles, amphibians called temnospondyls, arachnids including a fossil harvestman, and scorpions, millipedes, and insects were all caught in the buried landscape. The preservation worked through silicification. Groundwater rich in dissolved silica seeped into the wood and tissues and turned them to stone, cell by cell, keeping microscopic detail intact. Because the trunks are rooted in life position, we know the forest stood where it was buried rather than being washed in from elsewhere. The human history runs deep too. Local petrifactions were noted by the scholar Georgius Agricola in the 16th century, and people collected the stone wood through the 1700s. The modern dig is sometimes described as one of the first deliberately planned scientific excavations of a Permian fossil forest of this kind. From the assemblage, Rössler and colleagues reconstructed an entire food web. They identified the herbivores, the plants those animals ate, and the predators that hunted among them. The biodiversity was unexpectedly high for an early Permian land community, including creatures of the soil and the canopy alike. Zircons in the Zeisigwald Tuff allow precise uranium lid dating of the burial. This matters because most of what we know about early land life comes from scattered, broken remains washed into rivers and lakes. A complete terrestrial community, captured in place with its plants and animals together, is vanishingly rare. The forest grew in a seasonally dry, subtropical setting, deep in the interior of the supercontinent Pangaea, far from any ocean. To find scorpions and millipedes and early reptiles preserved alongside the very trees they lived on is to hold a complete ecosystem in cross-section, not just a museum drawer of isolated bones. The interpretive debate here is about timing. The mainstream view holds that a single catastrophic eruption buried the forest at once. A second view suggests several closely spaced eruptions stacked together rather than one clean instant. A third angle compares the preservation mode itself. Volcanic burial plus silicification captures different things than the airless lake bottoms of other fossil sites. And that comparison points to the next world, because some ash deposits preserved not just hard wood, but fur, feathers, and skin. Number 4. The Daohugou and Yanliao Biota. In Inner Mongolia, near the village of Daohugou, and in nearby parts of Liaoning and Hebei, lies a set of lake beds from the middle to early late Jurassic, roughly 165 to 160 million years ago. That makes them tens of millions of years older than the more famous Jahal Biota. These finely layered lake sediments are interlaced with volcanic ashfalls, and that combination produced some of the most astonishing preservation in the entire fossil record. When ash settled into still, oxygen-starved lake bottoms, it sealed bodies before they could rot. The result is soft tissue, fur, feathers, gliding membranes, and even stomach contents survived. Consider Castorocauda lutricimalis, a beaver-like swimming early mammal with preserved fur and a scaly tail, described by Chiang Ji and J. Shi Lo in 2006. Or Volaticotherium antiquum, a gliding mammal relative with its gliding membrane intact, also described in 2006. The flying reptiles are just as remarkable. Darwinopterus, described by Lu Junchang and colleagues in 2010, is a transitional pterosaur that bridges long-tailed and short-tailed body plans. There are salamanders too, such as Chunurpatin and Jehalatriton, preserved with soft tissue and external gills, among the oldest crown group salamanders known. Then come the feathered dinosaurs. Anchiornis huxley yielded something once thought impossible. By studying fossilized pigment structures called melanosomes, Quango Li, Julia Clark, and colleagues reconstructed its color in 2010, a gray body with a reddish crest. Epidexipteryx, described by Zhangfu Cheng and colleagues in 2008, carried strange ribbon-like tail feathers. Even the insects are exquisite, including a flea-like creature called Pseudopulex with enlarged mouthparts. The volcanic ash does double duty. It preserved the bodies, and its crystals allow uranium-lead and argon-argon dating. Those dates settled a long argument and confirmed that Daohugou is older than Jehol. The setting was a series of volcanically influenced lakes in a forested, seasonally wet landscape. The significance for the history of mammals is hard to overstate. For a long time, the Jurassic was imagined as an age when mammals were tiny, timid creatures scurrying underfoot, all more or less the same. Daohugou shattered that picture. Here are mammals that swam like otters, mammals that glided between trees, and mammals that dug and burrowed, all living tens of millions of years before the dinosaurs went extinct. The diversification of mammals into different ways of life began far earlier than anyone had thought. And the color work on Anchiornis opened a whole new field, because once you can read pigment from a fossil, extinct animals stop being gray guesses and start regaining their actual hues. The science here drives real debate. The mainstream view credits repeated ashfalls into anoxic lakes for the soft tissue preservation. A second debate asks whether the hair-like fibers on pterosaurs, called pycnofibers, are truly related to dinosaur feathers. A third strand concerns the origin of flight and feathers, and what the Yanliao creatures reveal about that timing. J. Shi Luo of the University of Chicago used these mammals to rewrite the early mammal family tree. Ash, it seems, can freeze fur and feathers. It can also turn a whole forest into stone where it stood. Number 5. The Petrified Forest of Lesvos. On the western side of the Greek island of Lesvos, in the Aegean Sea, stands a forest made of stone. It dates to the late Oligocene and early to middle Miocene, roughly 20 to 18 million years ago. The forest was destroyed and preserved in the same stroke by intense volcanic activity, by pyroclastic flows, mud flows called lahars, and thick falls of ash that buried a subtropical woodland rapidly. The preservation came through silicification. Silica-rich solutions from the volcanic groundwater replaced the wood molecule by molecule, keeping cellular structure, growth rings, bark, and even root systems. Many trunks stand upright exactly where they grew, which proves the forest was buried in place rather than swept together. The trees were varied. There were sequoias, relatives of today's giant redwoods, along with pines and flowering trees such as palm, laurel, cinnamon, and oak. The largest standing fossil trunk measured over 7 meters tall, and fallen trunks exceed 20 meters in length. The site preserves more than wood. Leaves, fruits, and seeds were captured too, building a full picture of the forest. The protected geopark covers more than 150 square kilometers of fossil-bearing volcanic terrain around the villages of Sigri, Antisa, and Eressos. It carries UNESCO Global Geopark status. The volcanic source lay in the northern Aegean, part of subduction-driven volcanism, active in the Miocene. Even today, road construction near Sigri keeps exposing new standing trunks, sometimes with their root balls still attached, and the Natural History Museum of the Lesvos Petrified Forest studies and protects them. The silica replacement was so faithful that researchers can identify fossil wood species under the microscope. The forest grew in a warm, humid climate before regional cooling and drying reshaped Aegean vegetation. It also links Eurasian Miocene forests to North American sequoia forests, a clue for tracing how plant groups spread across the world. Some trunks even show charring beneath the silica, recording the heat of the pyroclastic event. That charring is a small but telling detail. It means the trees were scorched by the heat of the flow at almost the same moment the silica began to lock them in stone. The two processes, destruction and preservation, were nearly simultaneous. The fact that sequoias once towered over a Greek island, the way their relatives tower over California today, tells us how much the map of the living world has shifted. Forest belts that now seem fixed were once draped across the planet in completely different patterns, and the Lesvos forest is one of the clearest windows we have onto that vanished arrangement. The debates here echo those at other sites. The mainstream view sees repeated ash and lahar burials, preserving successive waves of vegetation. A second debate weighs whether one dominant catastrophe did most of the work, or whether many separate events stacked over time. A third question concerns the exact chemistry, the precise source of the silica, and the pathway by which it replaced living tissue. Stone trees are dramatic enough, but ash did something more haunting elsewhere. It caught animals in the very act of living, and even sleeping. Number 6. The Lujiatun Beds. In western Liaoning province, in northeastern China, near the village of Lujiatun, lie the lowest beds of the Yixian Formation. They date to the early Cretaceous, roughly 125 to 126 million years ago. These beds are interpreted as volcanic debris flows and ash that buried animals quickly, often in lifelike poses. The nickname says it all. This is the Chinese Pompeii, where creatures were preserved in 3 dimensions rather than crushed flat. The most famous resident is Mei Long, whose name means sleeping dragon. It is a small troodontid dinosaur, preserved curled up in a bird-like sleeping posture, with its snout tucked beside its body. It was described by Xu Xing and Mark Norell in 2004. A second specimen was later found in the same sleeping pose, which strengthened the idea that these animals were buried suddenly, while at rest, perhaps overcome by volcanic gases. The beds teem with other life. There are abundant specimens of Psittacosaurus, a parrot-beaked plant eater, including a remarkable block of about 34 juveniles gathered with an adult, a possible nest aggregation. There is Repenomamus, a large carnivorous mammal, and one famous specimen was found with a juvenile Psittacosaurus inside its stomach, described by Hu Yaoming and colleagues in 2005. What sets Lujiatun apart is the 3-dimensional preservation. Higher in the Yixian Formation, fossils are flattened in lake shales. Here, skulls and brain cases survive in full relief, which lets scientists run CT scans to study dinosaur brains and senses. The whole Yixian Formation belongs to the Jehol Biota, famous for feathered dinosaurs, early birds, and early flowering plants. Volcanic layers dated by argon-argon and uranium lead methods pin down the age tightly. The sleeping posture of Meilong is worth pausing on. Modern birds tuck their heads beneath a wing or alongside the body to conserve heat while they sleep, and that is almost exactly the pose this little dinosaur was frozen in. To find that same behavior in a creature that lived 125 million years ago is a direct physical link between the dinosaurs and the birds that descended from them. The aggregation of more than 30 young Psittacosaurus around a single adult adds another behavioral clue, hinting that these animals may have gathered in groups, or that the young stayed together after hatching. These are the kinds of insights that scattered bones could never give. Only a buried instant can show an animal in the middle of simply being alive. The theories about exactly how the animals died are where it gets interesting. The mainstream and most dramatic reading is that a pyroclastic flow, or hot ash, buried the animals essentially alive and in place. A second view argues for a water-saturated volcanic debris flow, a lahar, that buried them shortly after death. A third, more skeptical position holds that at least some specimens settled into water laid volcanic sediment, which is not quite a Pompeii-style instant. The honest tension runs through all of it. How much of the buried alive story is supported by the rock, and how much is dramatized? A single buried world is astonishing, but one place in Wyoming stacked 27 of them. Number 7. The Yellowstone Fossil Forests. Along Specimen Ridge and Amethyst Mountain, in the northeastern part of Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, the cliffs hold a layer cake of deep time. They date to the late Eocene, roughly 50 to 45 million years ago, and belong to the Lamar River Formation within the Absaroka volcanic supergroup. Here scientists count at least 27 successive forests, stacked one above another, each grown on the buried remains of the one before. The agents of burial were volcanic lahars, those fast-moving mudflows, and ashfalls from the Absaroka volcanic field. Again and again, a forest grew. A volcanic event buried it. Soil formed on the new surface, and a new forest rose. Many trees were petrified, standing upright, with their roots still anchored in fossil soils called paleosols. The full sequence is exposed over about 365 meters of vertical cliff, which is roughly 1,200 feet. The forests were rich and warm. The trees include sycamore, walnut, magnolia, oak, maple, redwood, and pine relatives, pointing to a warm temperate to subtropical climate. The upright petrified stumps can reach 2 to 4 meters across, marking large mature trees. Leaves and pollen trapped between the layers let researchers reconstruct the climate of each individual forest. The science here has a long history. William Henry Holmes, working with the Hayden Survey in 1878, drew famous illustrations of the stacked fossil forests. Later, the Princeton paleobotanist Erling Dorff studied them intensively and popularized the figure of 27 successive forests. The petrification, as elsewhere, came from silica in volcanic ash percolating through groundwater. Think about what a stack of 27 forests actually means. Each one had to grow from bare volcanic debris, mature into tall timber over decades or centuries, and then be buried whole before the next could begin. That cycle repeated over and over in the same place. Reading the cliff from bottom to top is like turning the pages of a very slow book, where every page is an entire forest's lifetime. The leaves and pollen trapped between the layers even let researchers reconstruct the climate of each separate forest. So the sequence is not just a record of trees, but a record of a changing world replayed dozens of times. But there is a genuine controversy, and it has a modern twist. The classic mainstream view treats these as true forests, buried in place, one after another. A second view argues that some so-called forests are really accumulations of transported logs. This idea gained force after the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, when scientists watched logs float upright in Spirit Lake and then sink to stand like a fake forest on the lake bottom. A third, hybrid position reconciles the two. Stumps still rooted in paleosols are genuinely in place, while some loose trunks were indeed floated in. The Absaroka Field was an Eocene arc volcano system, far older than the modern Yellowstone hotspot caldera, and the whole sequence may span thousands of years. Stacked giant trees are spectacular. But one ashy lake preserved butterfly wings right beside them. Number 8. The Florissant Fossil Beds. Near the town of Florissant in central Colorado, west of Colorado Springs, lies one of the richest insect fossil sites on Earth, protected since 1969 as Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument. The fossils date to the late Eocene, roughly 34 million years ago. The story begins with a volcanic field nearby, the Guffey Volcanic Center, which produced lahars and ashfalls. First, a lahar dammed a stream valley and created an ancient body of water, now called Lake Florissant. Then, ashfalls drifted into the lake. The combination of fine volcanic ash and blooms of microscopic algae called diatoms produced thin layers known as paper shales. Those layers encased insects and leaves in breathtaking microscopic detail. The numbers are staggering. More than 1,700 species have been described from Florissant, including over 1,500 species of insects and spiders. Preserved insects include the beautiful butterfly Prodrius persephone, beetles, ants, and even a tsetse fly, relative named Glossina oligocina. The detail extends to butterfly wing scales, spider bodies, and the feathers of birds. Then, there are the giants. Florissant preserves enormous petrified redwood stumps of the species Sequoia affinis. The famous big stump is about 3.8 meters wide, which is roughly 12 feet across. Some stumps are fused trios. Lahar mudflows buried their bases, and silica, rich volcanic groundwater, turned them to stone. So the site holds both extremes at once, trees the size of rooms, and the wing scale of a single butterfly. Collecting began in the 1870s. The Princeton Scientific Expedition arrived in 1877, and the Smithsonian built collections over the following decades. The naturalist T.D.A. Cockerell made vast collections of insects and plants in the early 20th century, naming many species. Scientists use leaf margin analysis, which reads the shape of fossil leaf edges, to estimate the mean annual temperature of the late Eocene. The lake's annually layered sediments suggest it lasted thousands of years across many ash events. The monument itself exists because activists in 1969 blocked a plan to build housing on the beds. The diatoms deserve special mention because they are the hidden ingredient. When volcanic ash washed nutrients into the lake, these microscopic algae bloomed in vast numbers. As they died, they sank in mats that, layered with fine ash, formed the paper-thin shales that wrap each fossil. That is why a butterfly's wing, one of the most fragile things imaginable, can survive 34 million years here. It was sealed almost instantly between a film of dead algae and a dusting of ash, sheltered from the decay and the currents that destroy nearly everything else. The debates here are about mechanism and meaning. The mainstream view credits a volcanic dammed lake, plus ashfall, plus diatom blooms for the exceptional preservation. A second discussion weighs the relative roles of diatom mats and ash in encasing the insects. A third uses the Florissant flora to argue over competing estimates of the region's Eocene elevation. Ash can preserve the tiny and delicate. It can also kill and bury entire herds at once. Number 9. The Ashfall Fossil Beds. Near the town of Royal in Antelope County in northeastern Nebraska lies a place where an entire herd died together and was preserved in exquisite completeness. It dates to the late Miocene, about 11.8 to 12 million years ago. The killer came from far away. A super eruption of the Yellowstone hotspot, specifically the Bruno Jarbidge Center in what is now Idaho, blanketed the Great Plains in ash from about 1,600 kilometers away, which is around 1,000 miles. The ash fell up to a meter or more thick. Animals gathered at a waterhole breathed in the abrasive particles. This was not a quick death. The skeletons show a condition called hypertrophic pulmonary osteodystrophy, abnormal bone growths that reveal the animals suffered lung failure over days to weeks before they died. The site was discovered in 1971 by the paleontologist Michael Voorhees of the University of Nebraska, who spotted a fossil skull eroding out of a gully. What he found became a death assemblage of complete, articulated skeletons, preserved in the very positions in which the animals fell. The dominant species is Teleoceras major, a barrel-bodied, hippo-like rhinoceros that lived in herds around the waterhole. Dozens of complete rhino skeletons lie in the ash. Alongside them are three-toed horses, such as Cormohipparion, Pseudohipparion, and Protohippus, camels of the genus Procamelus, saber-toothed deer, birds, turtles, and a bone-crushing dog. The bed even records the order of dying. Lighter, smaller animals died first and lie lower in the ash. The big resistant rhinos held out longest and lie at the top. Some skeletons preserve grass seeds in their stomachs, and one rhino was found carrying an unborn calf. A baby rhino was found beside an adult, a hint of preserved family structure. To let people see this in place, the Hubbard Rhino Barn opened in 2009, a roofed building over skeletons excavated where they lay. The ash itself is called the Ashfall Bed, within the caprock member of the Ash Hollow Formation. Its chemistry was matched, like a fingerprint, to the Bruno Jarbidge source. The scene captures a Miocene savanna, a North America that looked like an African plain. The reason the preservation is so complete comes down to that inert ash and the speed of burial. With the carcasses sealed quickly under a thick blanket, scavengers could not reach them and decay could not take hold. The skeletons stayed articulated, every bone in its proper place, rather than being scattered as bones almost always are. That is why a rhino can still carry the seeds of its last meal in its gut, and why an unborn calf can survive inside its mother for nearly 12 million years. The waterhole drew the animals together in life, and the ash held them together in death, turning a single watering spot into one of the most complete snapshots of a vanished ecosystem ever found. The debates are about how to read the disaster. The mainstream view is that one distant super eruption caused mass death by ash inhalation. A second strand treats the small to large death sequence as a natural experiment in how different animals succumb. A third reads the family and herd groupings as evidence of teleoceras social behavior. Ash freezes animals, and in one place, it froze our own ancestors, caught mid-stride. Number 10. The Laetoli Footprints. At Laetoli in northern Tanzania, about 45 kilometers south of Olduvai Gorge and within the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, Ash preserved a moment that belongs to our own family. It happened about 3.66 million years ago in the Pliocene, a date fixed by argon-argon dating and the layering of the volcanic tuffs. The prints lie in a layer called the footprint tuff. Ash erupted by the nearby Sataman volcano. The way the footprint survived is almost too perfect. First, the ash fell. Then, a light rain dampened it, setting it like cement. Animals walked across the firm surface. Then more ash fell and sealed the tracks before wind or water could erase them. The discovery came in the years 1976 to 1978 by a team led by Mary Leakey. The hominin trackway itself was uncovered in 1978. The main trackway preserves at least 2, possibly 3, upright walking hominins, moving in the same direction across about 27 meters. The track makers are attributed to Australopithecus afarensis, the same species as the famous skeleton known as Lucy. These prints are the earliest direct, unmistakable evidence of habitual upright walking, made long before stone tools and long before large brains. The shape of the prints tells the story. They show a modern-like arched foot, a big toe held in line with the others rather than splayed for grasping, and a gait that rolls from heel strike to toe off. The stride and depth suggest a walk broadly like our own, though the fine details remain debated. The track makers did not walk alone. The same tuff preserves the prints of extinct horses called hipparion, elephants, rhinos, giraffes, guinea fowl, hares, and even a saber-toothed cat. The meaning is profound. Laetoli shows that upright walking evolved before the brain enlarged, overturning the old idea that big brains came first. For a long time, scientists assumed our ancestors grew clever first and stood upright later, to free their hands for tools. The footprints flipped that order. Here was a creature with a brain barely larger than a chimpanzee's, already walking on 2 legs as a matter of habit, more than 1 million years before the first stone tools. Bipedalism came first. Everything else followed. In 2016, an excavation by a team that included Fidelis Massau uncovered more tracks at a spot called Site S, including one very large individual interpreted as a tall male. That find fueled debate about body size differences and possibly group movement in this species. If the largest track maker really was a tall male, moving with smaller individuals, it hints that these early hominins may have traveled together in mixed groups, the faint outline of a social life pressed into volcanic ash. The interpretive debates are rich. The mainstream view reads a fully modern style upright gait. A second view sees subtle signs of a more bent hip, bent knee walk. A third reading describes 2 individuals side by side, with a third stepping into the leader's prints, an image that remains contested. The original trackway was even reburied in the 1990s to protect it, sparking its own debate over whether burial or display best preserves such a treasure. 10 worlds, 1 killer. So, why does volcanic ash, of all things, preserve so perfectly? The answer begins with a paradox. The same ash that kills is the thing that saves. Speed is the first reason. Ashfall and pyroclastic flows entomb organisms in hours to days, beating the decay and the scavengers that destroy almost everything else. The second reason is chemistry. Volcanic ash is largely inert, so it seals a body without dissolving it, as the inert ash at the Nebraska site did. The third reason is grain size. Ash is so fine that it takes and holds microscopic detail, the wing scale at Florissant, the toe pad at Laetoli. There is more. When ash settles into a lake, it can create an oxygen-free bottom where bacteria cannot work. which is how Daohugou kept its fur and feathers. And silica, leached from ash, permineralizes wood cell by cell, turning whole forests to stone at Lesvos, Chemnitz, Yellowstone, and Florissant. The very same eruption that buries a world also drops zircon crystals and glass that let scientists date it. So there are three broad ways ash preserves a world. It freezes standing forests in place. It captures soft tissue at the bottom of ashy lakes, and it builds mass death assemblages where whole herds fell. Many of these sites needed two pulses, one event to capture the moment, and a second to protect it, as at Laetoli and Ipolytarnóc. The trade-off is sobering. Spectacular preservation requires catastrophe, so the fossil record leans toward disaster days. Scientists call a site of such exceptional quality a Conservat Lagerstätte. Each one is a moment at time zero, a single instant held against the slow blur of deep time. But if these worlds are accidents of timing, how does anyone actually read a buried instant? The discipline that answers is called taphonomy, the study of how living things decay, get buried, and become fossils. Reading death positions is part of it. A curled sleeping posture like Mei Long means something different from the collapsed posture of a Nebraska rhino. The small to large death sequence at Ashfall becomes a vertical timeline within a single bed, the order of dying written in the layers. Bone pathology adds cause of death, as the lung disease growths at Nebraska reveal exactly how those animals died. Stomach contents and gut residues, the grass seeds, and the swallowed prey reveal diet and last meals. Telling in place from transported is a central skill. Rooted stumps in fossil soils prove life position, which is why the Yellowstone transport debate matters so much, and why the Mount St. Helens eruption became a natural experiment for reading ancient deposits. Radiometric dating of ash, uranium lead on zircons, and argon-argon on volcanic minerals fixes each world in time. Melanosome analysis reconstructs color from fossilized pigment structures, as it did for Anchiornis. Trackway analysis turns spacing and depth into gait, speed, and social grouping. Mapping a forest plant by plant rebuilds its three-dimensional structure, as at Wuda. CT scanning of three-dimensional skulls reveals brains and senses, as at Lujiatun. And always there is the work of telling one event from several, a single ashfall from a stack of tuffs. Geochemical fingerprinting even matches an ash to its source volcano, as the Nebraska ash was traced to Bruno Jarbidge. The competing theories at each site are not a weakness. They are how deep time gets read honestly. And these methods reveal not just deaths, but entire vanished worlds. Set the 10 sites side by side, and a lost planet comes into view. The Permian gives us equatorial swamp forests at Wuda and Chemnitz, growing through the long transition from an icehouse to a greenhouse Earth. The Jurassic offers volcanic lakes and forests at Daohugou, alive with early mammals that swam and glided, and feathered creatures that climbed and flew. The early Cretaceous at Lujiatun shows a rift basin where feathered dinosaurs lived among the first flowering plants. The Eocene at Yellowstone and Florissant reveals warm forests stretching across North America, full of redwoods and broadleaf trees. The Miocene brings subtropical coasts and grasslands at Ipolytarnóc, at Lesvos, and at Nebraska, where rhinos and horses and camels roamed a savanna that looked African. And the Pliocene at Laetoli gives us an African plain where upright walkers moved among now extinct giants. These snapshots reshape what we think we know. Sequoias once grew in Greece and in Colorado, mapping forest belts that have since vanished. North America once held its own savanna megafauna. Again and again, complexity appears earlier than expected in the layered Permian forests and the diverse Jurassic mammals. Each site is a single pixel, and together they sketch the biogeography of deep time, traced through leaf shapes, growth rings, and the makeup of each fossil flora. They track the long cooling and drying of the world. They preserve ecology, who lived alongside whom, far better than scattered bones ever could. There is an emotional weight to ecosystems that vanished without descendants, and a strange contrast between the violence of burial and the peace of the scene it preserved. Many of these worlds are still being uncovered and still being lost. At Wuda, the work is a race against the coal mine that destroys the Tuff as it exposes it. On Lesvos, road construction near Sigri keeps revealing new trunks, some with root balls intact. At Ashfall, excavation is deliberately slow, leaving many skeletons in place as a permanent display. At Laetoli, the discovery of Site S in 2016 proved that even famous sites still hold surprises. In Chemnitz, fossils keep surfacing from beneath a living city. The reburial debate at Laetoli, whether to protect by covering or to study by exposing, runs through the whole field. Conservators fight humidity and erosion inside the Ipolytarnóc pavilion, and illegal collecting threatens sites like Lesvos. Silicified wood and fine shale are fragile once exposed to the weather. New tools, CT scanning, melanosome mapping, and isotope analysis keep rereading old specimens, while museums at Chemnitz, Sigri, and Nebraska keep these worlds accessible. There is a constant tension between development, tourism, and preservation. Some sites are best left mostly unexcavated, saved for future methods we cannot yet imagine. UNESCO Geopark status protects some of these landscapes, and dates and burial mechanisms keep being refined. There may be undiscovered Ashfall worlds still sealed underground, and somewhere on Earth today, active volcanism is quietly building the fossil sites of the far future. So across 10 worlds and one killer, what does it all add up to? It comes back to the irony at the heart of every site. Destruction and preservation here are the same act. A volcano erases a world, and in the same breath, records it forever. The 10 sites are one story told 10 ways, in plants and footprints, in fur and herds and ancestors. The frame of a single ashfall is so powerful because it holds one instant against eternity. It moves us from the abstraction of deep time to something intimate, a sleeping dinosaur, a walking family, and it collapses the distance between then and now. The reminder is humbling. Every ecosystem, including our own, is a layer waiting to be buried. Exceptional preservation is a gift, giving us behavior and ecology, and even color, not just bones, and it casts scientists as readers of instants no one was meant to see. Our knowledge of these worlds depends on catastrophe and on luck. The recurring image is life caught mid-gesture, unaware. It means something that ash preserved a forest, a footprint, and a face from our own family tree, and that life persisted through repeated burials, from the Permian swamp to the Pliocene plain. Volcanoes are the planet's reluctant historians. The present is simply the next frozen instant in waiting. There is a quiet awe in standing where a world ended in an afternoon, and it changes how you look at any ordinary landscape. Deep time is not empty. It is full of buried afternoons, and ash kept the receipts. Picture again that first forest going still under falling ash, and now you understand what it became.